You don't even pay rent, she said. My granddaughter, my Lily. I stood in the kitchen with a plate of still warm oatmeal cookies, her favorite, or so I'd thought, and heard those 5 words float down the hallway like smoke from a burning room. I wasn't supposed to hear them. She was on the phone, door ajar, her voice lowered, but not quite enough. She's just here. Like furniture. No, I mean it. I can't keep living like this. The plate tilted slightly in my hand. I blinked hard, not because of the steam, but because of how dry my eyes suddenly felt. I didn't move. Not for a full minute. The ticking of the wall clock seemed louder. My heartbeat slower. My knees did what old knees do, buckled a bit, but I didn't fall. Not yet. She didn't even see me when she stepped out of her room, still on the call fingers, brushing her sleek ponytail into place. Yeah, I'll figure it out. But she's not staying forever, that's for sure. Then she saw me, blinked, smiled, said, "Oh, hi, Grandma. You made cookies." I handed her the plate, and she took it with a casual grace that might have been charm once, back when she still curled up next to me on the couch and called me her favorite person in the world. She took one bite. "These are kind of dry, but thanks." Then disappeared into the living room. I stared at the empty space where she had been, my hands still lifted as if I were offering something, a peace treaty, a memory, a truth. I didn't eat dinner that night. I didn't cry either. Something else settled in me, a strange silence, the kind you only hear after an earthquake or a funeral. The knowing, the undeniable truth. I was not wanted here. That night in bed, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan. Its slow rotation seemed to mimic my own thoughts, circling, never quite stopping. The room smelled faintly of lavender and laundry detergent. My granddaughter liked things clean. She liked things hers. And somehow, over the past few years, I had become something she tolerated, a wrinkle in her otherwise curated life. I remembered the first time I brought her to this condo. She was 5. Her small hand gripped mine tightly as I unlocked the front door. "Is this ours?" she asked. I said, "It's home." And it was. For nearly 20 years, I had kept this space warm, clean, full of books and blankets and lemon tea. She never lacked for anything, until apparently she lacked space, autonomy, ownership. I should have felt anger. Maybe a younger version of me would have. But all I felt was a profound sense of stillness, the kind that comes before a decision. I slept with the window open. The wind was cool that night. It brushed against my cheek like a farewell. The next morning, I made tea the way I always did, 1 bag of chamomile steeped in silence. The ceramic cup warmed my hands as I stood at the kitchen window, watching the traffic inch by below, people rushing to work, to errands, to things that seemed important. I used to be like them. I used to move with purpose, wear a watch, have schedules. Now, my calendar was empty. I wasn't even sure where I kept it anymore. Lily left early keys, jingling perfume, trailing behind her like a ghost of the girl I used to know. She didn't say goodbye. I didn't expect her to. She had a meeting or a gym class or a life I didn't fit into anymore. The condo felt different once the door clicked shut. Lighter, maybe. Or maybe that was just me unclenching, even if only slightly. I wandered into the spare bedroom. It used to be her room, back when her parents fell apart and she came to live with me. Divorce is cruelest to the children. She was 7 and already so quiet. I made her a reading corner by the window with floor cushions and a shelf of books. She used to sit there for hours, legs folded, fingers curled around Anne of Green Gables or Matilda. She told me once I was like Miss Honey. I cried in the hallway after that. Now the room was her office. White desk, sleek monitor, vision boards with quotes like, "Manifest your life and protect your energy." I touched the edge of the desk. Everything smelled like ambition and scented candles. In the closet, I kept a few old boxes. Memorabilia, I guess. Letters from her, a drawing of the two of us, labeled me and Grandma best friends forever. A broken music box she loved. I took out the letter she wrote me on her high school graduation day. "You saved me," it read in crooked cursive. "I don't know who I'd be without you." I sat on the carpet and read it 5 times. What changed? Was it time? Was it the slow erosion of appreciation into expectation? Or had I simply stayed too long? My mind drifted further back. I remembered selling my little house, a modest place, but mine to help pay for Lily's tuition when the scholarships didn't stretch far enough. She didn't know that. I never told her. I didn't want her to feel guilty. She had dreams. I had savings. What else was I saving? For she wanted to be a graphic designer. I supported that. She struggled after college, like they all do, but I let her stay here until she got on her feet. Except she never really left. And when I had a fall, nothing serious, just a sprain, she suggested I move in with her. Only it wasn't her place. It was still mine. I transferred the deed to her name last Christmas. I told her it was so she wouldn't worry if anything happened to me. I lied. I did it because I thought it would make her feel secure, wanted, anchored. I see now that all it made me was dispensable. Around lunchtime, I opened the drawer where I kept the deed copies and paperwork. There it was, the title transfer signed and stamped. I traced my name, once bold, now etched in fading ink, and hers beside it. No co-ownership, no life estate clause, just a clean handover. I'd made it so easy, but not irreversible. I started making calls, quiet ones, not frantic, just methodical. I spoke to a woman named Diane at a real estate office downtown. Told her I was thinking about selling a property. She was kind. "We can walk you through every step," she said. No pressure. I didn't mention that the person currently living in it didn't know. Later that afternoon, I made dinner, a simple stew. Lily didn't come home until late. Her heels clicked against the tile. She barely glanced at the table. "I'm not hungry," she said. "I had sushi." I nodded. She paused, looked at the bowl in front of me. "Are you okay? You seem off." I smiled. "I'm fine, darling. Just a little tired." She kissed my cheek absently, like a reflex. "I'll be in my room." I watched her walk away, her figure illuminated by the soft glow of the hallway light. She didn't look back. She never did anymore. I spooned up a bite of stew, warm and familiar, and tasted everything I had poured into this life, the love, the sacrifice, the silence. And for the first time in a long while, I began to taste the end of it too. The next morning, I ironed my blouse. Not because I was going anywhere, but because I needed the rhythm of it, the hiss of steam, the firm tug of fabric, the neat line of a pressed seam. There's something meditative about caring for something no one else notices. Maybe that's what grandmothering had always been, invisible labor in exchange for visible grace. Lily was already gone. She didn't leave a note. She hadn't in years. I poured myself a cup of weak coffee and sat by the bay window. My knees ached more than usual, and I welcomed the pain. It meant I was still here, still occupying space, still capable of feeling something. The phone buzzed. A message from Diane. Let me know when's a good time to talk options. No rush. I didn't reply yet. Instead, I found myself picking up a pen, the old fountain one I kept for bills and birthdays, and pulled a small notebook from the kitchen drawer. On the first page, I wrote a single sentence. I'm not doing this out of anger. That was true. This wasn't revenge. I wasn't trying to teach anyone a lesson. I just didn't want to disappear while still standing in the same room. I needed to reclaim some fragment of myself before I vanished completely in Lily's eyes. After lunch, I shuffled through drawers looking for the red folder where I kept copies of everything Social Security documents, insurance, the transfer of ownership. I had labeled it legacy once upon a time. The irony wasn't lost on me. It was supposed to make things easier for Lily should something happen to me. And now I was hoping to use it to quietly undo the very gift I'd given. Inside was also a letter Lily had written me years ago. I hadn't seen it in a long time. Her handwriting was bubbly, then full of loops and certainty. She had written it during her freshman year at college. Grandma, I miss you so much. The ramen here is terrible. I found a squirrel in the laundry room yesterday and thought of you. I wish I could hug you. Thank you for always believing in me. I'll make you proud. I read it over and over, looking for that version of her. Where had that girl gone? Was I holding her to a moment she'd outgrown, or had she simply reshaped herself in a world where kindness had less currency than independence? I thought about all the little changes over the years, how she'd started correcting my speech in public, how she laughed harder at her friends' jokes than mine, how she rarely introduced me to colleagues. Small things, easy to dismiss, but love isn't betrayed all at once. It leaks, it evaporates. I went into her room again. She wouldn't be home until late. I looked around with careful eyes, the way someone might walk through a museum of their own irrelevance. A book lay open on her bed, a sleek, hardbound volume on minimalist living. I skimmed the first chapter. Eliminate what doesn't serve your growth. The words landed like quiet indictments. In the corner was a small black trash bin. I don't know why I looked inside. Maybe I was looking for proof that I wasn't imagining it. There it was, my birthday card from 3 weeks ago, still in its envelope, still sealed, not even opened. I stood still for a long time, not angry, not sad, just finished. Back in the kitchen, I made another cup of coffee this time with extra sugar. I looked at the worn seat of my chair, the grooves on the countertop I'd polished so many times, the faint outline on the wall where a photo of Lily and me used to hang, the one she replaced with an abstract print from IKEA. I sat down and dialed Diane. I'm ready, I said. She didn't ask questions, just warmth in her voice. Okay, we'll move slowly. We can start with a quiet valuation and go from there. I gave her the address. Before we hung up, she asked, will the current occupant be involved? I paused. No, not yet. I just need to understand my options first. I hung up and placed the phone face down. That night, Lily came home just after 10. Her heels clicked, her hair tied in a loose bun, her eyes fixed on her phone. I'm starving, she said. Did we eat all the hummus she meant had I? I didn't correct her. There's some stew left, I offered. She made a face. Ugh, too heavy. I'll order something. She moved around the kitchen like I wasn't there. She never asked how my day was. She hadn't in weeks, maybe months. I couldn't remember the last time she called me by my name. Not Grandma, not Nana, not even you. She just moved past me, like furniture. Later, I heard her laugh from behind her bedroom door. Soft music, maybe a video call. Maybe someone who did ask about her day. I sat in my own room, robe tied around my waist, and stared at the blank wall. I'd lived a full life, but I was no longer living it here. The next morning, I opened the curtains earlier than usual. The lake outside shimmered under a thin veil of mist, like it had secrets of its own. I used to believe that the lake healed people, that its stillness somehow passed into you, slowing down the ache in your bones, the swirl in your chest. But lately, even the water felt indifferent. I made myself toast. Not for nourishment, just habit. The kind of survival you don't question until you realize you're the only one who notices when it's missing. I heard Lily moving in her room, drawers, closet doors, the usual rush of someone already late. I didn't call out. I just listened. And when she finally emerged, it was with her usual flurry shoes in hand, phone tucked between ear and shoulder lips, moving not toward me, but to whoever was on the other end. Yeah, I'll be at the agency by 9. Can you move the 11 to next week? I've got the pitch deck done. She stopped only when she saw me watching her. Our eyes met. For a split second, something flickered. Surprise, maybe guilt, maybe just recognition that I still existed. Morning, she said, her voice lighter now, performative. I nodded. Have a good day. Thanks, she said, grabbing her tote, heading out the door without finishing her coffee. Love you, she said it quickly, as if it were punctuation. She hadn't hugged me in months. After she left, I walked slowly to the drawer where I kept my journals. I hadn't written in weeks, but that morning I felt compelled. I opened a new page and wrote, "When a house is no longer a home, it becomes a museum of someone else's life, and I am just a relic in it." I didn't cry. That surprised me. I think a part of me had already grieved this, not the loss of affection, but the loss of illusion. I spent the rest of the day gathering small things, my mother's brooch, the recipe book with notes in the margins. The letters my husband had written me from overseas ink, faded, but still warm in sentiment. These were the things that knew me, that saw me, that didn't need to be updated or uploaded or muted. At 2:15 p.m., Diane texted, "I have a quiet appraiser who can come Thursday at 10. No signage. Discreet. You won't need to do a thing." I replied, "That works. Thank you." I walked to the window again. Across the street, a young woman was helping her toddler into a car seat. Her gestures were clumsy but tender. She kissed the child's forehead before closing the door. I watched her drive away, wondering what version of me once looked like that, and if anyone remembered her. Lily returned that evening with a paper bag of takeout and a tense look. "Long day," she muttered, setting the bag down. She didn't ask how mine was. I waited, gave her space. 10 minutes passed before she finally broke the silence. "Hey, so just putting it out there, the nursing home near Maple Drive. It has really good reviews. I mean, not that I'm pushing anything, just looking into long-term ideas." There it was, a sentence dressed in concern, but weighted with relief. I looked at her, really looked at her, her brows furrowed like she expected pushback. She was bracing for conflict, but I had none to offer. I nodded. "That's smart of you to research." She blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah, I just thought maybe it would be good to have options. It doesn't have to be now." "It's always good to have options," I replied. She smiled. then looked away, that small, nervous fidget she did when she wasn't sure if she'd crossed a line. She had, but I wasn't going to mark it for her. Let her feel the space she'd created between us. Let her hear the silence that once held stories, now echoing like a forgotten room. That night, I wrapped the brooch in a silk handkerchief and placed it in a small wooden box. I added a note. This belonged to your great-grandmother. I wore it the day you were born. I didn't leave it for Lily. I placed it in a sealed envelope labeled to Rosa, if she ever asks. Rosa was Lily's daughter, barely 7. She still held my hand tightly when we walked. She still asked questions. She still saw me. But she was being taught silently, gradually, to look past me, just as her mother had been. And if one day Rosa asked, who was Nana really, I wanted there to be something left that told her the truth. Not the truth Lily believed, the real one. Thursday arrived cloaked in silence. The lake was unnaturally still, like it was holding its breath alongside me. At precisely 10:00 a.m., a modest white sedan pulled into the gravel driveway. A tall man stepped out, his hair peppered with gray clipboard in hand, and the kind of neutral demeanor that told you he'd seen hundreds of houses just like this and hundreds of families letting go. I opened the door before he could knock. Ms. Lane, he asked, extending a polite nod. Yes, come in. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning quickly, not judging, just registering. Square footage, natural light, structural lines. To him, this wasn't my sanctuary. It was a number, a listing, a potential asset for someone else. We walked through the house together. I said little. He asked the necessary questions, never unkind, just methodical. When we reached the back sunroom, overlooking the lake, he paused. This view, that's rare, he said almost under his breath. I nodded. It's why we bought it 40 years ago. He scribbled something on his clipboard. I watched his pen move, and with every stroke, I felt the weight of memory transcribed into market value. The breakfast nook, where Lily took her first steps, assessed. The den, where my late husband read the newspaper every Sunday, tallied. The fireplace, where Rosa hung paper snowflakes just last winter, priced. How soon are you looking to list, he asked. I didn't answer right away. I walked to the window, rested my palm against the cool glass. I'm not listing, I said calmly. I'm gifting. He looked up. To family. No, I said. To someone who treated me like one. There was a pause, not awkward, just heavy with something unspoken, a kind of understanding. I let him out, thanked him, and closed the door behind him. That afternoon I made tea for myself and walked out onto the porch. The wooden boards creaked same spots they always had. I'd once thought about fixing them. Not anymore. I sat with my tea, the breeze soft on my face, and watched Roberto tending the hedges across the street. He moved with care, precise and gentle, the way people do when their work is personal. I called his name. He looked up, surprised, wiped his brow, and came over. Senora Lane, he said, with a warm smile. Do you have a moment? I asked. Of course. We sat on the porch. I poured him tea. He looked puzzled but polite. I want to tell you something, I began. He leaned in, concerned. I'm giving you this house. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard me right. Pardon, I'm transferring the deed. I've already spoken with a lawyer. No catches, no expectations. Just a gift. He looked stricken. But I, Senora, I'm just the gardener. You've been more than that, I said, meeting his eyes. You're the only person who's ever asked if I needed help carrying groceries, who fixed the broken shutter without charging me, who sat with me after the storm when the power was out. You saw me. He was silent, overwhelmed. I don't need the money, I continued, And I don't need to stay somewhere I'm no longer wanted. This place deserves someone who still believes in tending to things. You do. Tears welled in his eyes. He shook his head slowly, as if trying to push away the gravity of it. I don't have the words, he whispered. You don't need them. I placed my hand on his shoulder. This house gave me shelter. Now it can give you a beginning. He nodded, eyes damp, lips pressed together to hold the moment still. As he left, he turned once more, hand to his heart, and said, Gracias, con toda mi alma. I whispered, de nada. That night, I packed lightly, just one suitcase and the wooden box with my journals and keepsakes. Everything else, the furniture, the dishes, the paintings stayed. They belonged to the life that lived here, not the one I was moving toward. I left a letter for Lily, not to accuse, not to explain, just to say, when a home becomes a burden, it's no longer a gift. I've set myself free. You're free too. I didn't sign it. She'd know. And if she didn't, that was no longer my responsibility. The bus ride into the next town was quiet. Not emotionally quiet, but literally so. Just the hum of tires on asphalt, the occasional rustle of a newspaper. I sat near the back window seat, clutching my small suitcase and a canvas tote with a jar of tea leaves and a tattered copy of Wuthering Heights. The seat beside me remained empty the entire trip. No one looked twice. No one asked questions. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't shrink from the silence. I welcomed it. Freedom doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it slips in unnoticed, a door quietly closing behind you as you step away from the life you outgrew. The small apartment I'd rented was above a bookstore run by a widow named May. We'd met once at a reading years ago, both of us women, with gray in our hair and fire still left in our chests. When I called and asked if her upstairs tenant had moved out, she didn't hesitate. The room's yours, she said. Come whenever you're ready. It smelled of old wood and dried lavender, and the windows creaked in the breeze. There was no view of a lake, no sprawling porch, no sunroom for memories to gather. But there was something better, a desk, a warm kettle, and the kind of quiet that asks nothing from you. I spent the first night sitting cross-legged on the bare floor, eating toast with jam from a chipped saucer, watching the moonlight crawl across the bookshelf. I thought of all the things I wouldn't be doing anymore, waiting for a call that wouldn't come, over, thinking my every word, around Lily, pretending to be okay with being set aside. I no longer needed to perform grief. I was living truth. Each morning, May left a pastry outside my door, sometimes a cheese roll, sometimes a cinnamon bun, always warm, always without a note. And each morning I left her a folded page from a novel, annotated with underlines and scribbles and tiny stars. Our quiet exchange became ritual. No thank yous, no explanations, just mutual recognition, two women who understood the value of gentle things. On the fourth day, I went down to the lake near the edge of town, smaller than the one I left behind, ringed with willows and weathered benches. I brought my journal and a pen that still held the ink of heartbreak. I sat there for hours, watching children skip rocks, a teenager teaching his younger brother how to ride a bike. At one point, a heron landed in the reeds, still, unbothered, regal in its solitude. I wrote, I am not broken. I was just misplaced. The pages filled quickly after that, not with anger, not with regret, but with small observations, the way light refracted through leaves, the way wind rustled through reeds, like a language older than pain. For years, I had made space for everyone else's emotions. Now I made space for mine. And in that space, I began to rebuild. One evening, I received a letter. The envelope was thick. The handwriting rushed. It was from Lily. Inside were 3 pages, not neatly written, messy, blotched with ink, emotional. It didn't begin with, "I'm sorry." It began with, "I don't understand you anymore, Mom." She spoke of confusion, of embarrassment, of trying to explain to Rosa why Grandma had left and why the lake house was now some stranger's home. She said Roberto's family had already moved in. She said it felt like a betrayal. That word hung heavy. She didn't see her own betrayal, only mine. She ended with, "I hope you're safe. I hope this isn't permanent. I'm angry, but I still love you." I folded the letter carefully, placed it inside the cover of my journal, not out of sentimentality, but because even words meant to wound are still proof that someone once tried to reach you. I didn't write back, not yet. Some silences are not punishments. They're spaces we carve to breathe again. Later that night, I walked to May's kitchen and asked if she wanted to split a bottle of wine. She raised an eyebrow, then nodded. "Red or white?" "Red," I said. "Something that doesn't pretend to be sweet." We drank slowly. We spoke little. But when I told her about the house, the gardener, the daughter, she didn't gasp or give advice. She just said, "Sometimes letting go is the loudest way to say you matter." I looked at her and nodded. A quiet nod, a full one. Because in that moment I knew I hadn't lost a home. I'd claimed myself. The next morning I woke earlier than usual. Something in the air, maybe the scent of jasmine drifting through the window, maybe the dream I couldn't quite recall, stirred me from sleep before the sun had even finished rising. There was no message from Lily, no knock at the door, and that was fine. I made tea slowly, methodically. 1 scoop hot water steep for exactly 4 minutes. I'd begun to enjoy the precision of small rituals, the way they grounded me in a life that was now mine alone. After breakfast, I walked down to the farmer's market by the church. It was quiet, except for the occasional bell chime from the chapel and the soft murmur of vendors setting up their tables. I bought Pears a small jar of honey and a linen apron from a woman with soft eyes and arthritic hands. She told me I reminded her of her sister, who had run away from a wealthy family and opened a flower shop by the sea. Did she regret it? I asked. She looked off into the trees, only the part where she waited too long. I thanked her and walked on, letting those words settle in my chest like stones in still water. When I returned home, I sat by the window with my tea and stared at the lake. It wasn't the grand lake from before, not the one with the wooden dock and the stories carved into every railing. But it had its own quiet dignity. It didn't need to be big to be beautiful. That evening, May invited me to a reading at the bookstore. Local authors, folding chairs, lemon cookies wrapped in wax paper. I almost said no. I almost stayed inside with my shadows. But I went. And it was there, among mismatched chairs, and the scent of old pages that I read aloud for the first time in years. Not something I'd written recently. No, that would have been too raw, too soon. I read a passage from a story I'd started a decade ago about a woman who plants tulips in her backyard every spring, even though they never bloom the way she expects. The audience clapped politely, and May squeezed my hand afterward. "You're still here," she whispered. "That's what matters." Later that week, I received another letter, this time from Rosa. The handwriting was clumsy, crayon on lined paper, spelling errors and backwards R's. Grandma, Mommy is sad. I miss your garden. When are you coming back? Daddy says you gave the house to the lawn man. That's funny. I like him. He gave me a flower. It was purple. I put it in water, but it died. Mommy cried yesterday. I think she misses you. Love, Rosa. I read that letter a dozen times, and I cried not out of regret, but out of gratitude, because even in all the mess Lily had made of our relationship, Rosa had sent me something pure, not filtered through resentment, not twisted by pride, just a child's heart reaching. I folded the letter gently and placed it beside the first one. Then I wrote back, not to Lily, to Rosa. My dearest Rosa, purple flowers are my favorite too. Tell the lawn man thank you for making you smile. I miss your laugh more than you know. Grown-ups are complicated sometimes. But you, my love, are perfect just as you are. One day we'll plant something together, and this time we'll make sure it grows. Love always, Grandma. I mailed it the next morning. No return address, no expectations, just love, soft but unwavering. And in that simple act, I realized something. I could love them both, even if I never went back. I could hold my daughter's memory and still protect my own dignity. Because the truth is, I didn't leave to punish her. I left to preserve myself. And that is not abandonment. That is survival with grace. I began keeping a box, just an old cigar tin I found in the back of May's antique store. I lined it with velvet from a thrifted blouse I cut apart. Inside, I placed the small things I didn't want to lose again. A hairpin Rosa had once used to fasten her crown of dandelions, a dried slice of orange from the tea Lily used to make when she wanted to talk, a receipt from the hardware store the last time David and I built something together before he passed. I didn't keep these to haunt myself. I kept them to remind me I'd once loved with everything I had, that I wasn't cold or bitter or ungrateful, like Lily had shouted through tears the night we argued in the garage. You always act like you're owed something, she'd hissed. I don't have to take care of you just because you exist. I hadn't said anything back then. I'd gone silent like I always did. That was my survival tactic for years: absorb, withdraw, adapt. But now, here in this quieter life, I found myself revisiting those words with different ears. I sat with them, rolled them around in my mouth like a bitter root, and I discovered something unexpected. She had been in pain too. It didn't justify what she said. It didn't erase the disrespect. But maybe it explained the desperation. She had been drowning, and instead of reaching for my hand, she blamed me for the water. That thought didn't soothe the sting. It didn't change the past, but it unhooked me from a question that had kept me awake for months. Why did she do it? Not everything has a clean answer. Some people disappoint you simply because they're scared, because they don't know how to love in the way you taught them, or because the version of you they built in their heads no longer matches the person you became when you stopped making yourself small. I had stopped folding myself into corners. I had stopped apologizing for surviving longer than was convenient. And that made me inconvenient. That made me disposable. But it also made me free. I started taking longer walks, not to escape, but to breathe. I talked to people, shopkeepers, retired teachers, the woman with 3 poodles who dressed them in tiny sweaters. I told them my name. I let them see me. It's funny what happens when you stop hiding. One afternoon, I met a man named Joseph. He worked at the art gallery near the pier. Mid-60s, soft eyes, hands that had known both chisels and grief. We talked about sculpture. He told me he once carved a marble fountain that was mistaken for Italian, but was actually made in Detroit. I laughed. It felt good. It felt like something I wasn't sure I deserved, but I welcomed it anyway. Joseph didn't ask me about my past. He noticed the way I admired the light through the stained glass and asked if I'd like to join the gallery's Thursday night group, not for artists, but for observers, people who had once made things and wanted to remember how. I went. I didn't bring any work, just myself. And that it turned out was enough. Week by week, I found myself sketching again. Just outlines, shapes, the curve of a hand, a fallen petal, the side of a face I once knew. Joseph sat beside me sometimes, not close enough to touch, but near enough that I could feel his quietness settle beside mine like two notes in a minor chord. One evening after a session, he walked me home. We didn't speak much, but when we reached the gate, he said something that stayed with me. Some people see the frame and assume the painting's missing, but maybe you just haven't finished it yet. I looked at him. He didn't flinch. He didn't need to explain, and I didn't need to answer. I just nodded and watched him walk away into the soft lavender of dusk. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror, not to critique, not to mourn, just to look. I saw a woman with tired eyes, silver-streaked hair, and shoulders no longer carrying everyone else's weight. I saw someone still becoming. That winter, it snowed just once, just enough to coat the rooftops in a thin shimmer, like someone had dusted the town with powdered sugar and then changed their mind. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, mint and chamomile, my own blend, and listened to the stillness. In that hush, I remembered the old days in the condo, the thermostat always 2 degrees too low, Lily arguing with utility companies on speakerphone, Rosa giggling on the floor with her markers the carpet stained in circles of juice and jelly. It could have been chaos, but I didn't mind. I used to believe that love came with noise, that if a house was quiet, it meant no one cared enough to speak. I know better now. It was on one of those silent afternoons that a letter came. Not a bill, not a flyer. Not the usual perfunctory envelope that carried no intention. This one was handwritten my name in ink that trailed off slightly. At the end, like the writer had hesitated. It was from Rosa. She'd written, in careful loops, the way they teach kids in 2nd grade, only with a few words spelled like they sounded. She didn't apologize. Children don't. They just tell you what they feel without shame. I miss your tea, she said, the one with flowers in it. And then a line that caught in my throat. Mom says, we can't come visit, but I'm saving my allowance to send you a new teacup since the one I broke was your favorite. No punctuation, just the unedited sincerity of a child who remembered. That teacup blue porcelain with tiny violets had shattered 2 summers ago. I told her it was okay that cups break, not love. She'd cried anyway. I kept the pieces, still do. Rose's letter sat in my lap for hours. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed slow, deep breaths, like each word had opened a sealed window inside me. I didn't write back. Not yet. I needed time to understand what to say, or if saying anything would help her or only confuse her more. But I put the letter in the cigar tin, right on top, and that night I boiled a fresh pot of tea, dropped in a few dried petals, and poured it into the chipped white mug I'd found at a garage sale. The violet one was gone, but the ritual remained. I sipped in silence. It tasted like memory. The next week, Joseph invited me to a community showcase, The gallery had cleared a space for newcomers to display their first works, sketches, woodcuts, even quilts. I told him I wasn't ready. He said, "No one ever is." So I framed one of my line drawings, just pencil, on parchment, of a woman sitting by a window with her hands folded in her lap. I didn't name it. People walked by, nodded, commented quietly. A few stopped. One woman whispered to her husband, "That's how my mother used to wait for the mailman." I didn't speak up. I just listened. Later, Joseph clinked his plastic cup of cider against mine and said, "Sometimes showing up is the brave part." He looked at me gently, like someone who understood that healing isn't loud, that it doesn't come with applause. That evening, walking home through the cool air, I thought of the condo, of the long hallway that always smelled like bleach and burnt toast, of Rosa's drawings taped to my bedroom wall, of Lily's shoes in the entryway, always pointed out like she was halfway out the door. I'd scrubbed that place for years, paid half the HOA fees, bought groceries when she was in between jobs, took Rosa to school when her alarms failed. But the day she told me to leave to figure something out, she didn't even look at me. She just stood at the sink, back turned, hands in suds, and said, "It's not working anymore, Ma." Like I was a broken appliance. The words still floated in the corners of my mind, more shadow than sound. But in that moment, I realized something. It wasn't that I hadn't meant anything. It was that I had meant too much responsibility, too much memory, too much reminder of everything Lily had wanted to escape. She saw my presence, not as comfort, but as echo, and she couldn't bear to hear herself in me. That night, I stood outside my little house and looked up at the sky, cloudless, cold, honest. I said nothing, just nodded to the dark. Some absences don't want to be filled. Some silences don't need to be broken. But some names like Rosa's deserve to be whispered into the quiet, just to remind the universe that they matter. I said her name, twice. It wasn't long after that I started drawing every morning. Just 30 minutes, sometimes less. Always before the world woke up, before the neighbor's dog barked, before the kettle even began to hiss. Not because I wanted to become an artist, I had no illusions about that, but because it was the only way I could tell the truth without having to explain myself. The pencil didn't ask me to forgive. The paper didn't interrupt. And my own hands, veined and slow, never judged what they made. One morning, I sketched the front door of the condo. I remembered the exact grain of the wood, the dent at the bottom where Rosa used to kick off her shoes. Then I drew the key, the one Lily gave me when I moved in, taped inside a note that said, "Welcome home, Mom." I still had that key, but the note I'd burned. It felt too cruel now, the way memory lies through handwriting. Joseph came by that afternoon. He brought fig jam and crackers and a folded flyer he'd found at the hardware store, local seniors, art exhibition, quiet hands, loud hearts. He circled the date in red and said, "You should think about it." I shook my head. I'm not loud-hearted, just tired. He didn't argue. He never did. That night, as I was putting away the dishes, I noticed one of Rosa's old drawings had slipped from the tin box, a clumsy crayon scrawl of a garden with one crooked butterfly. She'd written, "For Bongoi," in big wobbly letters. My breath caught. That's what she used to call me. It had been months since I'd heard my name spoken like that. Not Mom, not Mrs. Tran, not Ma'am, just Bongoi, a name that held lineage, softness, and quiet strength. A name spoken with trust. I pressed the paper to my chest. Maybe I was tired, but I wasn't done. A week later, Joseph and I visited a small art supply shop tucked behind the church. I bought real paper this time, heavier stock, smooth and off-white, and a charcoal set I could barely afford. He said it was an investment in what I asked. In seeing yourself clearly, he answered. I laughed, but there was something sobering in his tone. That night, I tried drawing myself, not how I looked now, but how I remembered feeling before all this, before the betrayal, the shame, the packing, the word, facility. It came out as a woman sitting in a chair with one hand over her chest, not in pain, just stillness, like she was remembering something beautiful that also hurt. I pinned it above my desk. I didn't title that one either. One morning, a knock came at the door. It wasn't Joseph. It wasn't the mailman. It was Lily. She stood on the porch in a brown coat that didn't quite fit her eyes, sunken like she hadn't slept, and a paper bag in her hands. For a second, we both just stared. No words, no pretense. Then she said, I brought Rosa's school photo. She asked me to. I took the bag. Inside was a small frame, a letter folded in half, and a chocolate bar. Rosa said you like these, Lily added. I nodded, but didn't invite her in. She looked past me into the house, at the sketches taped gently to the wall, at the dusty kettle on the stove, at the small world I'd rebuilt with threads she'd unraveled. I didn't know you drew. I shrugged. You never asked. She blinked but didn't argue. Then she said, it not like a confession, more like a truth that had been sitting too long in her mouth. I wasn't fair to you. I said nothing. She looked down. I didn't know how to be your daughter and a mother at the same time. Still, I stayed silent. Sometimes love is what you don't say. She turned to leave. At the edge of the porch, she hesitated. Rosa wants to come visit. I told her it's your choice. I didn't answer right away. Because that was the moment I understood something I hadn't before. Forgiveness isn't a door you open. It's a path you clear, stone by stone, so someone can walk toward you if they choose. Maybe Rosa would walk it. Maybe she wouldn't, but I'd started clearing it the moment I chose to stay standing when Lily said it's not working, and I was still standing. I watched Lily disappear down the path, shrinking like a memory. Then I brought the photo inside, placed it beside the drawing of the crooked butterfly, and sat in the quiet. I didn't cry, but I did whisper, Bongoi is still here. Just loud enough for the walls to remember. The house felt lighter after that day, not because anything had changed in a big dramatic way, the kind that novels or movies depend on, but because something had shifted deep in the marrow of my silence. That shift was mine alone. I didn't tell Joseph that Lily had come by. I didn't want his sympathy, or worse, his advice. I just wanted the moment to live quietly where it belonged, in the space between pain and peace. Instead, I returned to the lake, the same lake where I'd once walked with my late husband, the same lake where I watched Rosa learn to skip stones, and where Lily used to run barefoot through the grass, back when everything was laughter and crumbs and early dinners with too much rice and not enough time. The water hadn't changed, still flat, still silver, but the woman looking into it had. I sat on the old bench by the edge, the one that had cracked in the winter of '92 and never quite sat right again, and I sketched what I saw. Not the lake, not the trees. I sketched the bench, because sometimes the thing that holds you matters more than the thing you're looking at. And as my pencil moved, I realized the lake didn't need to speak. It didn't need to forgive. It just needed to reflect. That afternoon, Joseph brought over a large envelope. From the lawyer, he said, setting it down gently like it might bite. I opened it without ceremony. Inside were the final transfer documents for the lake house. Not to Lily, not to anyone in the family. To Mr. Than, the gardener, the man who once quietly planted bougainvillea where no one asked and who trimmed the hedges on Sundays, even when he wasn't paid. The man who bowed every time he saw me, as if respect was not a transaction, but a ritual. I'd asked Joseph to handle it months ago. Quietly, legally, irrevocably. No revenge, just justice, just balance. Joseph watched my face, waiting for something, approval, regret, maybe even guilt. But I simply nodded. It's done then. He nodded back. Do you want to go see it? I shook my head. No, it's not mine anymore. And for once, that didn't feel like a loss. That night, I slept a full 8 hours. No dreams, no sharp awakenings, no phantom footsteps in the hallway, just the quiet hum of a house that was enough. I woke up early, made tea, and pulled out the nice paper, the expensive kind that made me feel like my thoughts deserved something beautiful to land on. I began a new sketch, this one of a woman standing in a doorway, looking out. She held nothing. She waited for no one, but she stood tall. I didn't give her a name because I already knew who she was. She was the version of me that didn't ask anymore, didn't beg, didn't bend. She simply was, and that was enough. The wind rattled the window gently as if to say, yes, keep going. So I did. One drawing a day, one truth at a time. Each image a step toward something unspoken, not a destination, just a return to myself, to the woman they'd buried under obligation, to the mother they assumed would always say yes, to the elder they expected to be silent. But I wasn't silent. I was deliberate, and every line I drew was a sentence they'd never get to rewrite. The first call came a week later. I didn't answer. The second, a text, just one word. Why I stared at it, feeling the old twitch of needing to explain, needing to soften, needing to make sure she understood I wasn't trying to hurt her, but I didn't owe that anymore. I set the phone down without responding, and for the first time in years, my hands didn't shake after. The house remained still. No storm followed. A few days after that, Rosa appeared. I heard the gate creak, then the soft knock at my door. I knew it was her even before I opened it. There was a gentleness in Rosa's presence that always felt like dusk, soft, inevitable, forgiving. She had a paper bag in her arms, full of pastries, and her smile faltered just a little when I didn't reach for them. Hi, Grandma, she said, voice small. I'm not here to argue. I needed to see you. I let her in, not because I owed her anything, but because sometimes when a door's knocked on gently, it's okay to open it. We sat across from each other. She didn't eat the pastries. I didn't offer tea. It wasn't that kind of visit. I know you're angry, she began. I didn't correct her. She took that as permission to keep going. Lily's upset. She said you gave the lake house away to a stranger. He's not a stranger, I said. My voice was calm, not cold, just clear. Rosa bit her lip. But you could have given it to me. I would have taken care of it. I tilted my head. Would you have taken care of me? She looked away. That was enough. She didn't stay long. Before she left, she stood awkwardly at the door bag of untouched pastries still in hand. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Then don't say anything, I replied. When the door closed behind her, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't collapse against it. in some cinematic heap. I made myself a cup of chrysanthemum tea and went back to my sketch pad. That day I drew a girl in a hallway, one foot out the door, one hand still reaching back. She was unsure, torn, but she was moving, and somehow I felt that was Rosa. Maybe not today, but eventually. Because the truth is, some people won't understand until they feel the silence for themselves, and I was finally ready to let them. The weeks passed, and I began noticing things about myself I hadn't in years. The way my handwriting curved differently when I wasn't rushed. The pleasure of washing dishes slowly, not because I had to, but because the warm water soothed my fingers. The way music filled a room when there was no one else to talk over it. I didn't call anyone. I didn't send birthday cards. I didn't check Lily's social media. I gave myself the rarest gift of all distance, not the angry kind, the spacious kind. I thought often about Mr. Than, how he probably walked through that garden now with pride, pruning and planting without anyone to question him. I wondered if he'd built the koi pond he always talked about. I hoped he had. I hoped the bougainvillea bloomed louder than Lily's silence ever could. I didn't miss the lake house because it wasn't mine anymore, not just legally, spiritually. What I missed some days was the version of myself who believed that giving everything would guarantee love. She was so earnest, so faithful, so wrong, and yet I didn't hate her. She tried. God, did she try. So I sketched her too. One afternoon, under a pale sun, I drew a woman in an apron offering a bowl of soup with both hands. Her face was tired but kind, her eyes searching. I titled it, The Offering. I pinned it on my wall, not as a warning, as a memorial, because that version of me deserved to be remembered, not erased, but remembered with boundaries, with context, with clarity, and with the promise never again. One morning in late spring, I woke to the sound of birds outside my window, louder, more insistent than usual. I shuffled to the porch in my robe and slippers tea in hand, and watched as two sparrows bickered over a twig. It made me smile. There was something freeing about witnessing something so small, so alive, unburdened by human drama. I was no longer afraid of silence. I had come to crave it. But even silence, if held long enough, makes space for new sounds. That day, I received a letter, handwritten, folded neatly into a pale blue envelope, no return address. Inside, a note from Anna. It wasn't long, barely 4 lines. I don't know if this matters now, but I remember the stories you told me. The one about the cherry tree. The one about the woman who built a home out of nothing. I never forgot them. I never forgot you. Love, Anna. I stared at the words for a long time. Anna had been 6 the last time I saw her, all curls and questions. She used to sit on the edge of my bed and ask me if old people had secret powers. I told her yes, we remember things. No one else does. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears finally falling, not from pain, but from something gentler, a kind of gratitude. I never needed them to come back. I only ever wanted to know that something I gave had stayed. Anna's letter was proof. It reminded me that not all things we give disappear. Some take root quietly and grow in places we'll never see. That night, I took out a new canvas. This time, I painted a small girl, reaching for a branch, heavy with blossoms. Behind her, a woman watched, not interfering, just present. The sky above them was open, endless. I called it the memory tree. I didn't tell anyone about Anna's note. I didn't need to. It belonged to me and to the version of me who had once sat by her bed and answered every question with a story. The next morning, I donated half my furniture to a local shelter. I kept only what I used, what I loved, and what felt like mine. In the evenings, I started walking again. Not far, just down to the old fence line where the fields met the woods. I'd forgotten how the world changed color when the sun dipped low, everything golden, everything forgiven. I ran into neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. Mr. Baugh, who still wore his fishing hat like a crown. Ms. Lon, who gave me a jar of her fig jam and pretended not to notice my watery eyes when I tasted it. It was sweet and salty and reminded me that life, even in its smallest details, still wanted to feed me. People stopped asking about Lily, about Rosa, about the lake house. They saw me just me, and that was enough. I had stopped being a mother in exile. I had become a woman in bloom, no longer defined by absence, but by presence. No longer someone who gave everything away, but someone who knew how to keep what mattered. I began volunteering at the library. Quiet work, paper shelves, stories. I helped children find books about dragons and clouds and brave girls with stubborn hearts. One boy asked me if I'd ever ridden a motorcycle. I said no, but I once flew on the back of a rooster in a dream. He laughed so hard he spilled his apple juice. It was the best sound I'd heard in months. Healing doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like fig jam and library cards. Sometimes it looks like walking home under a sky that doesn't ask you to explain anything anymore. It wasn't that I stopped loving them. That's never been the issue. Even now, if you asked me, I'd tell you plainly, I loved them even in the end, even when they left, even when they looked me in the eyes and saw someone they no longer had use for. But loving someone doesn't mean you owe them your life. It took me far too long to understand that. There's a difference between love that flows freely and love that's extracted piece by piece until you're nothing but a hollowed-out version of yourself standing at the edge of a conversation you're no longer allowed to join. And yet I had waited for years, waited for Rosa to call, not for money or instructions, but because she missed the sound of my voice. Waited for Lily to show up unannounced on my doorstep. No apologies, no explanations, just arms outstretched. None of that came. But something else did. A softness, not toward them, not even toward myself initially, but toward the life that had continued without their presence. Toward the quiet rituals that had filled the space they left behind. There was no drama in it, no sudden realization, just the slow accumulation of mornings with tea and toast, of skies changing color over the ridge of neighbors, waving from porches as I passed by, a new kind of rhythm. I found myself humming again, small tunes I hadn't thought about in decades, a waltz my mother used to play on the radio, a folk song I once sang to Rosa when she was sick and burning with fever. It was strange what returned when I stopped asking for anything back. My body too changed. I wasn't stronger. Age doesn't reverse, but I was steadier. I walked with more awareness, less urgency. I took fewer painkillers. I let the breeze come through the open windows and fall asleep to the sound of rustling leaves instead of television noise. One morning, while tending to my small potted garden, rosemary mint 2 geraniums, I saw a figure on the path leading up to my door. It wasn't Rosa or Lily. It was a woman from the senior center, someone I'd met once at a painting class. Her name was Carol. She held a grocery bag in one hand and a pie dish in the other. I had extra, she said, placing the items on my porch. And I remembered, you said You liked apricots. She turned to leave, but I called out, "Do you have time for tea?" She did. We sat on the porch for over an hour. We talked about everything except the past. That night, I wrote something in my journal, a habit I had taken up again after years of silence. Today, someone remembered something small about me, and that was enough. The weight of being forgotten had lingered like a shadow for too long. I had feared it would eat away at the edges of who I was until I disappeared entirely. But I hadn't disappeared. I had simply changed shape. They could forget me, yes, but I could remember myself. Sometimes I sat by the lake, not the one I sold, but a smaller, quieter one, tucked behind the woods near my cottage. Children rarely came there. It was mostly turtles and reeds, and the occasional heron that moved like poetry. I'd bring a sandwich, a sketch pad, and just be. Once I thought, if they saw me now, truly saw me, would they recognize the woman they left behind? I'm not sure, but I've come to realize it doesn't matter. The woman they left behind is gone, and the one who remains has no intention of waiting by the phone or begging to be seen. She has apricot pie cooling on the sill. She has mint tea steeping in a chipped ceramic mug. She has a friend named Carol. She has herself unruined, unbitter, and finally unafraid. The first holiday season after I left passed like a whisper. No tree, no wrapping paper, no frantic list of who needed what. I didn't send cards. I didn't receive any either, and it didn't break me. I made a small pot of stew, lit a candle for no reason other than it smelled like cinnamon and reminded me of simpler winters when Rosa would crawl into my bed with cold toes and whisper, "Don't tell Mom I had extra cookies." That memory used to sting. Now it glowed distant but not painful, like a song you forgot you knew the lyrics to until it plays in a quiet room. I didn't look them up online. I didn't ask after them through friends. I didn't open the folder where I'd once stored photos and old report cards and crayon drawings labeled Grandma's house. I knew where it was, but I let it be. I let everything be. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't make declarations. It moves in slowly, quietly. One soft step at a time. One moment where you no longer need them to feel bad, to call, to acknowledge the wound. You just notice one day that the wound has scarred over. That morning, the lake was frozen, not hard enough to walk on, but still and silent like a secret. I stood at the edge, gloved hands in pockets, and watched my breath cloud the air. There was a time when I would have prayed for their return, for one tearful reunion, for Lily to knock on my door, eyes red, and say she'd been wrong, that she understood now what it meant to love someone, not for their usefulness, but for their presence. But I no longer needed that story to come true, because I had written another one where the villain never apologizes, one where the wounded doesn't beg, one where the heroine walks away and instead of disappearing, she roots. She waters her mint. She learns to make soup from scratch. She wakes up without dread. She lets other people in. They call it aging, but I think it's something else, a kind of returning. To the girl I was before, I became Mother Grandma Burden. Her name was June. She liked poetry and blue dresses and staying up too late, reading novels she wasn't supposed to understand yet. I found her again. I bought a new blue dress, not for anyone, just because the fabric reminded me of forget-me-nots and dust skies. The mailman young kind, always in a rush, slowed down the other day to ask if I was doing okay out here all alone. I smiled. "I'm not alone," I said. Not really, and it was true, because solitude isn't emptiness. It's presence uncluttered. It's what remains when you stop waiting to be chosen. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't triumphant. I was full of memory, of breath of stories no one else knew. And that was enough. Some treasures had been recovered. Others, more valuable, still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.